What? Did Bai Chaoge run away again? A generation of gambling kings suffered a tragic disaster, but unexpectedly, they were reborn and unexpectedly crossed over to a young girl named Bai Chaoge. Repeated jailbreaks, unexpected disasters from heaven, and the cold-blooded CEO, making it impossible to escape from then on. Keywords of the novel. After escaping prison 5 times, I bumped into the CEO without a pop-up window. After escaping prison 5 times, I bumped into the CEO's complete TXT collection download. After escaping prison 5 times, I bumped into the CEO's latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. What? Bai Chaoge has escaped again. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. What? Bai Chaoge has escaped again. What? Bai Chaoge ran away again. As the words fell, the lights in the juvenile detention center gradually lit up. The director learned of the situation and sent people to search for Bai Chaoge, who had escaped. In the cold winter of the 12th lunar month, white snow falls one after another. Halfway down the mountain, Bai Chaoge leisurely swayed her legs and rode a newly hijacked electric donkey, slowly moving towards her small secret base. Counting the days, today should be 18 days since she was reborn and crossed over. During this period, she escaped from prison 5 times. Except for the first time when she failed due to unfamiliarity with her place, she successfully escaped on several other occasions. In her past life, she could also be considered a prominent figure in the world rankings. The globally renowned gambling king, Big Sister, has gone through a sea of swords and fire, and has gone through a barrage of bullets. Unexpectedly, she fell into the hands of someone beside her. Bai Chaoge has never been wary of the people he trusts, which is why he gave that bastard an opportunity to poison her at his birthday party. Without realizing it, he pulled her down from the altar and even wiped out many loyal little brothers who were loyal to her. She vaguely remembers the scene of herself being stepped on by the person next to her. At that time, her mouth was covered in black blood, and her whole body was poisoned, making it difficult to use her energy. She could only be rubbed like an ant. She was tortured for 3 whole days and 3 nights, soaking in the dungeon reservoir until her body lost temperature and died unjustly. Unexpectedly, she came back to life. Reborn on Bai Chaoge, who shares the same name and surname as herself, but this fate is a shortcut to great success. In his past life, Bai Chaoge had a smooth sailing and was a prominent figure in both black and white. In this life, Bai Chaoge is just an ant who cannot stand the stage, and her mother is still a shameless mistress. Finally, she was framed by her good sisters to steal the antique necklace of her mistress, which led to her being put in the juvenile detention center. She was bullied every day and often didn't have enough food to eat. Just thinking about it makes me sad. Suddenly, a dazzling flash flashed across Bai Chaoge's face, causing her to briefly lose sight due to strong light stimulation. She instinctively covered her eyes. 3 seconds later. Bang! Bai Chaoge lost her balance and suddenly fell to the ground. At the same time, there seemed to be an accident on the other side, rolling downhill. Wearing prison uniforms, Bai Chaoge stood barefoot on an empty path, with a particularly tragic scene of a car accident in front of her. Her gaze was dull, and she secretly said something was wrong. She just despised the boredom of the juvenile detention center, being locked up every day and feeling frustrated. She had only escaped 3 or 4 times to relieve her stress, and never thought of causing trouble. Bai Chaoge looked around, wild mountains and forests, in the middle of the night. No one should have noticed a car accident here. As long as she made some arrangements at the scene, I believe no one could have seen it. It's just that this person is not easy to handle. She sank in her heart. How about burying it? As time passed by, Bai Chaoge made a secret decision in her heart. She twisted her hands and feet and went forward to observe. She forcefully pulled open the unrecognizable car door, and upon entering her eyes was a man covered in blood and unconscious. Looking at the outfit on the car, her family should be well off. Shouldn't wealthy children like them all wander around in entertainment venues? How come I run to this wilderness and play racing in the middle of the night, and even get rid of myself? Reaching out to the artery under the man's shirt at the neck, Bai Chaoge's heart suddenly became colder than the temperature of several degrees below zero. Speaking of which, it would only freeze in a second. This unlucky guy is dead. Man driving a sports car was killed by a little electric donkey driven by an 18-year-old girl. Speak it out, does anyone believe it? Bai Chaoge stroked his mind and quickly calmed himself down. The most important thing now is to destroy the body and not let anyone discover any clues, otherwise it won't be as simple as going to the juvenile detention center. Maybe she will have to spend the rest of her life in prison. She looked up at the man little by little, with several holes pierced by glass in his chest. Blood kept gushing out, and a thumb-like hole was hit on his forehead. The blood stained half of his face, making it difficult to see his true face. I don't think this little brother would mind if I dig a hole and bury you casually, would he? Bai Chaoge muttered to himself towards the corpse. Without waiting for his response, he used his strength to take the little brother out of the driver's seat, lay him flat on the ground, and carefully covered him with a cotton jacket pulled out of the car. Under the icy and snowy dusk, a small figure painstakingly pushed the sports car step by step into the soon-to-be frozen bottom of the lake, watching it sink bit by bit. Bai Chaoge finally breathed a sigh of relief. She was also worried whether the lake had frozen and whether the car could be perfectly destroyed. Now it seemed that she was skeptical. After dealing with the biggest guy, Bai Chaoge is ready to deal with the man on the ground. Bai Chaoge takes off his thick coat, picks up his sleeve, picks up the shovel he picked up from the roadside, and starts digging the hole. The cold wind was piercing, leaving no trace on her cheeks. Bai Chaoge, who was focused on digging a hole, didn't notice at all. The man's fingertips trembled slightly under her feet. 2:00 a.m. The gloomy scene around her made Bai Chaoge, who had a broad understanding, shiver all over her body. However, looking at the 3-meter pit she had dug, she nodded in satisfaction. As soon as she turned around, a blood-covered man stood behind her at some point, his slender fingers tightly gripping her lifeline. The man's light brown eyes were fixed on Bai Chaoge, but he didn't say a word. It seemed that he was hurt quite a bit, and he didn't even have the strength to say one more word. Bai Chaoge looked up and down at the man with sharp eyes, raised his hand and gently grabbed his hand. He slowly spoke up and said, "You should know that I'm not the culprit that caused your car accident, right?" The woman's voice was mixed with tempting magnetism, making people unconsciously addicted. "Don't be afraid, I won't harm you." Bai Chaoge glanced at the freshly dug pit next to him without leaving a trace, showing no signs of guilt. Isn't this man's brain damaged? She bet he must be out of his mind now and won't be able to distinguish the hypocrisy in her words. In her previous life, she never lost in gambling. The man's expression was stiff and numb, making it difficult to distinguish the hypocrisy of his mental state. He stood still for a while, but didn't see him speak for a long time. Just as Bai Chaoge was preparing to escape, the man's chest began to fluctuate violently, followed by spitting out a mouthful of blood and a sudden coma. Also, dizzy again. Adhering to the principle that saving a person's life is better than building a level 7 pagoda, Bai Chaoge decided to take the person back to his secret base and save him a small life. With an unpleasant expression, Bai Chaoge tentatively kicked the man's feet, but he still didn't react. It was then that Bai Chaoge let go, and without saying a word, he lifted the man and ran towards the wooden house. A few meters away, the head of a lonely wooden cabin appeared in front of the two of them. The cabin was well hidden by Bai Chaoge, with only a small tip on the roof exposed to the soil, and most of the body hidden under the soil, making it an underground wooden cabin. The man was jolted all the way and had already regained consciousness, holding a question mark and letting the woman dominate. A woman should be a practitioner, and he, who is seriously injured, is no match for her. Judging from the current situation, it is obvious that this woman has no hostility towards him, otherwise he would have been buried in the mud pit long ago. Bai Chaoge had just entered the wooden house when he threw the man to the ground. The man took a deep breath and snorted without leaving a trace. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Mute. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Mute. Wake up. The man's slight change caught Bai Chaoge's attention and casually asked. The man remained silent, his eyes slightly open, pretending to calmly examine the environment inside the room. The cabin, which was less than 5 square meters, was cleaned up spotlessly. There was only a small bed and a small table inside, on which a candle was lit. By the candlelight, the man saw Bai Chaoge's appearance clearly for the first time. With a delicate and childish face, her behavior was completely different. For example, now, Bai Chaoge rudely pulled a large bundle of firewood from somewhere and skillfully lit a lighter, igniting the firewood. What's your name? Bai Chaoge took out a box of cigarettes from his pocket, lit them for himself, and sat on a small wooden bed with a big knife, gazing down at the man. Silence, a deathly silence. The man remained motionless, his chest's originally rapid and chaotic breathing gradually calmed down a bit as the temperature inside the room rose, but he still had no intention of opening his mouth. Bai Chaoge frowned slightly. She didn't provoke a mute, did she? Staring at the man with complex eyes for a while, he didn't argue with him anymore. He dug out his own makeshift medicine box alone, took advantage of the snow water just boiling, and went forward to treat the man's wound. Little brother, next, you need to take off all your clothes. If you don't treat this wound, it will become inflamed. Bai Chaoge spoke in the tone of a bay girl and knelt down on one knee in front of the man, persuading him kindly. She had originally planned to pick up her clothes directly, but on second thought, if she scared this mute and attracted the people from the juvenile detention center, it would be a big trouble. She decided to let him do it himself to ensure sufficient food and clothing. The man moved his body, clearly aware of his own situation. His extremely long eyelashes trembled, and he slowly lifted his eyes, holding the woman's small hand and placing it on him. Looking at her with unwavering determination in her eyes, it seems that she wants to come as she pleases. I don't know if it's the candlelight or Bai Chaoge's dizziness, but I always feel a faint blush on the man's face. It's a bit interesting. Bai Chaoge curved her eyes, half smiling, giving off the illusion of a promiscuous woman teasing a good family. Wet clothes are not good for the wound. Since he doesn't want to do it himself, Bai Chaoge can only do it himself. In front of the main protagonist, Bai Chaoge blatantly peeled off the man's clothes, carefully used a towel to wipe off the dirty blood on his body, and gradually took out the glass fragments that had been punctured into his skin, blood dripping profusely. Even Bai Chaoge, who was accustomed to scenes of fighting and killing, couldn't help but tremble in his heart. Looking at the man again, his face was already pale without a trace of blood, his lips were dry and cracked, and due to pain, his whole body trembled slightly. Sweat beads on his body, like a broken kite, kept rising outward. Seeing the situation was not good, she had to raise her spirits to cope with it. The man's injury was much more serious than she had imagined. While pondering, the strength in her hand accidentally increased a bit. Hush! Suddenly, the man couldn't help but snort. The body involuntarily tightened, and the wound was instantly torn even larger, with blood constantly flowing out. At this moment, Bai Chaoge didn't care about the difference between men and women, and directly covered the bleeding wound on the man's chest. The warm little hand touched the cold skin, and the pain on the man's body suddenly eased a lot, but the blood at the wound still did not stop. Wait for me here, Bai Chaoge restrained her mind and solemnly explained to the man before walking out on her own. The man opened his mouth and was about to say, "Be careful and safe," but the woman's figure was nowhere to be seen. In no time, Bai Chaoge pushed the door with a large handful of unknown herbs. Sitting cross-legged in front of the man, he casually grabbed 6 or 7 leaves and stuffed them into his mouth. He chewed them a few times, then spat them out on his hand and gently attached them to the wound. This is sanchi, which can stop bleeding and reduce inflammation. Bai Chaoge spat out a mouthful of saliva and then quickly stuffed a handful of leaves into his mouth. In the cold winter of the 12th lunar month, she thought she wouldn't be able to find this thing, but she didn't expect to find so many more plants in a corner. These few plants alone are enough to use. Her focused expression caught the man's attention, and her mouth became dry and dry. She couldn't help but swallow her saliva. It was unclear if it was because she was getting up close with a person of the opposite sex for the first time, and her breathing accelerated uncontrollably, even forgetting the sharp pain on her body. Bai Chaoge was focused on dealing with the wounds on the man's body, completely oblivious to his changes. Instead, the man's constantly swallowing Adam's apple and the constantly fluctuating abdominal muscles that accompanied his breathing made Bai Chaoge somewhat overwhelmed. Fortunately, the man is now carrying a wound on his body, otherwise he might have been eaten and wiped clean by Bai Chaoge. The man stared blankly at Bai Chaoge's every move, his affectionate gestures, and his close face, feeling the other person's breath lingering around him. He always felt that the other person was intentionally or unintentionally seducing him, but unfortunately he had no evidence. After feast for his eyes, Bai Chaoge wrapped him tightly around the bed with a musty blanket and carefully covered him with his own thick cotton jacket. Next, after the man cleans up, let him rest here for a while. She still needs to return to the juvenile detention center, otherwise the people there will probably call the police to find her. At that time, it may not be easy to explain, and this little brother will also be implicated. Maybe she will be beaten up and charged with being a minor extramarital affair man. After achieving great success, Bai Chaoge was afraid of clapping his hands and prepared to leave. At this moment, the man suddenly grabbed Bai Chaoge's wrist. The force on his hand was so strong that Bai Chaoge thought that the wound on this guy's body was fake. He looked at Bai Chaoge with a deep and dangerous look in his eyes. Was he worried that she would leave him and leave? After all, in the wilderness and mountains, he couldn't speak and was still carrying such serious injuries that it was impossible for him to move a step forward. Without Bai Chaoge, there was no other way but to wait for death. Bai Chaoge scratched her nose with a guilty heart, but patiently squatted down and approached him, saying, "Be good, sister, just go out for a while and come back soon." As soon as these words were spoken, both of them were stunned. Sister. Bai Chaoge was clearly still a minor, while the man was clearly not a young boy in his 20s. It was a bit arrogant to call him sister in front of him. Bai Chaoge is still hesitating about how to make up for it. He can't just say that it's because he has too many younger brothers in his past life and has become accustomed to shouting, right? The other party didn't think too much, but instead gave this nickname a particularly novel look. After only 2 seconds of being stunned, they came back to their senses and stared at Bai Chaoge with their eyes fixed on her. Their eyes were full of reluctance and pity, looking like a charming little wife. Looking at the other person's disbelief, Bai Chaoge helplessly grabbed the man in her arms and said solemnly, "I really have something to do, and I will never leave you alone." After speaking, he mercilessly released the hand that the man had imprisoned him, and walked out without looking back. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. The situation is not optimistic. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. The situation is not optimistic. At 5 o'clock in the morning, Bai Chaoge appeared at the juvenile detention center on the mountaintop like a thief, agile like a monkey, and flipped into the center with just 1 foot. As soon as she entered with her front foot, the person who caught her with her back foot appeared in front of her. "Bai Chaoge, you really make it easy for me to find you." The director stood in front of Bai Chaoge with high toes, followed by 7 or 8 prison guards holding iron bars and electric batons. Immediately after, a bucket of cold water poured down from her head, encountering the air below zero, and instantly froze on Bai Chaoge's body. The piercing cold made her instantly wake up from exhaustion. Wrinkled his pretty eyebrows, and a hint of coolness flashed through his eyes. "Why, have you become mute after wandering around? The director walked up and lifted Bai Chaoge's chin with one fingertip, his head disgustingly approaching her chest, his nose constantly sniffing left and right. Bai Chaoge's coat was left in the cabin, and now she only has a thin white T-dot shirt as a base, which looks particularly tempting. I didn't expect this young girl to mature unexpectedly despite her young age. Previously, Bai Chaoge's clothing was mainly loose, often wearing a thick coat outside, which caused no one to notice her figure so rough. The director's eyes were as if they were on Bai Chaoge's body, and desire surged in his eyes. The assistant immediately noticed the director's caution and gave a glance to the two prisoners who were holding Bai Chaoge. The two of them immediately understood and walked towards the small wooden house with Bai Chaoge. The director gave his assistant an appreciative look and immediately followed suit. He eagerly extended his tongue to lick his lips, fearing that others might not know his thoughtfulness. Remember to go collect the bonus when you come back. The director whispered as he walked up to his assistant. The assistant looked at the sleazy figure of the director, covered in goosebumps, and shook his head repeatedly. Ah, another flower has fallen. After speaking, he ran away in the opposite direction. Let go. The director waved his hand and withdrew the two prison guards who were restraining Bai Chaoge. Bai Chaoge twisted her hands and relaxed her muscles while carefully examining the surroundings. She is very familiar with the small black room, but now this place is clearly not the small black room she often goes into. It is more like a room for stacking miscellaneous items, with poor lighting and only one window on the surrounding walls. At this time, it is welded to death by steel bars. The only exit to this room is the rusty iron door when entering. The only key should be hung on the two prison guards who just closed the door. If you want to go out, you may have to go through the director's command. Just as Bai Chaoge was secretly speculating, the director strode forward and flirted with Bai Chaoge's hair, saying vaguely and greasy, "Don't think about it. Unless it's my command, you'll be stuck in the wind." Bai Chaoge raised her eyebrows, and her guess remained as accurate as ever. So the next step is not a problem anymore under the mountain, young master, as you expected, that woman escaped from the mountain. A fully armed man stood respectfully in front of the bed, reporting the results of his investigation. At this moment, the man on the bed felt an unfathomable glint through the depths of his pupils. His fingertips casually played with a small long strand of hair, and the collar of his white shirt was slightly open. His already pale and bloodless skin was further weakened by the contrast, and his eyebrows and eyes were no longer as gentle and weak as when he was in front of Bai Chaoge. He looked more like another man with a completely different temperament, extremely aggressive. "Have you found out about the car accident?" The man raised his thin lips lightly, his voice incredibly cold and intimidating. Chiyue's heart trembled, but she still gritted her head and said, "Young master, it's all my fault that my subordinates are not doing well. I don't have any clue yet. This matter concerns the safety of Helian Yuan. He has already stepped forward, but still has not gained anything. If this continues, he is afraid that he will be dismembered and fed to the fish by the young master." The man who heard the words was not surprised at all, just a faint He knew Red Moon's abilities the best, and he couldn't even detect them. The complexity of this matter is probably not simple. "I will stay here for the time being, while you can wait and see what happens." Helian Yuan's voice was indifferent. As soon as these words were spoken, even the usually calm Chiyue began to lose her composure. "Xiao Zhu, I'm afraid it's not very safe here." Chiyue didn't even think about it, so she promptly stepped out to stop it. In the wilderness, it is too difficult to arrange human protection here, and coupled with the fact that Helian Yuan is still injured, it may be difficult to deal with any unexpected situation. At this critical moment, Chiyue needs to investigate the culprit of this car accident while also considering the situation of Helian Yuan here. She is really lacking in clone skills. On this level, Helian Yuan never thought of it, but he had his own plan. He looked up at the red moon, his brown pupils contracting in a circle, and said with an unquestionable tone, this matter is arranged like this, you can handle the rest yourself. Chiyue shivered all over and nodded obediently, saying yes. At this moment, Chiyue realized that she had exceeded some limits, and Helian Yuan's arrangement naturally had his reasons, not something that his subordinates should have controlled. So, what should that little girl do? Chiyue asked cautiously. According to the habit of Helian Yuan in the past, any creature that approaches him at an opportunity will inevitably have to disappear. Just as Chiyue was secretly speculating, Helian Yuan's smiling gaze fell on him, and the contempt in his eyes was undoubtedly doubting how brainless he had raised. A while ago, his little life was too peaceful, and he couldn't even figure out this small matter. Well, young master, what I mean is that the little girl seems to be in a bad situation on the mountain. Should we take action? Chiyue trembled and quickly spoke up to explain. Even though his initial intention was not like this, it was clear that Helian Yuan's intention would never hope that the little girl would disappear. At the same time, the situation of Bai Chaoge, as stated by Chiyue, is not optimistic. The director was clearly trained, and his skills were exceptionally agile. Bai Chaoge had been avoiding in circles for nearly half an hour, and he had already collapsed. Looking at the director across from him, he was just a bit wheezing. Obviously, his energy was on top of Bai Chaoge. Bai Chaoge, do you still have the strength to hide? The director stood directly opposite Bai Chaoge, supporting his big belly and panting, pointing at Bai Chaoge and mocking him. And Bai Chaoge, who had not rested for the first half of the night and was already exhausted, has been slipping for more than 10 laps in a row, almost losing both feet and kneeling on the ground. Humph, bold man, do you think I'll be afraid of you? As the saying goes, losing is not losing, and Bai Chaoge forced himself to fight back. She can't compete in strength, so only her brain is left. Old thing, you've probably harmed many underage girls in these years, haven't you? You're not afraid of being exposed and taking off your black hat. Strong and calm, Bai Chaoge gradually diverted his thoughts and took the opportunity to ease his mind. The man seemed to have heard a joke and burst out laughing. Expose it. Who dares? On this mountain, I am like a dominant local emperor. Who dares to interfere in my affairs? As he spoke, the man's ant-sized eyes rolled around twice, and his mind had already realized that Bai Chaoge was deliberately delaying time. Fortunately, a veteran who has been in the officialdom for decades, he saw through Bai Chaoge's careful thinking at first sight and no longer gave her a chance. In Bai Chaoge's surprised eyes, he rushed straight to Bai Chaoge at an extremely fast speed. Bai Chaoge couldn't dodge and was tightly embraced by a man. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Big Sister's Temperament. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Big Sister's Temperament. Let go. Let go. Bai Chaoge didn't expect him to suddenly get into a difficult situation and used his strength to suckle, blushing but unable to break free from his constraints. Suddenly, at the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of a reflective bright spot. Bai Chaoge started from his heart and jumped up and down, rolling on the ground. Oh! I didn't expect you to spend more time playing than me. The director was pleasantly surprised by Bai Chaoge's reaction, bared a row of big teeth, stretched out a greasy hand, and was about to attack Bai Chaoge's skirt. Bai Chaoge curled her lips and noticed a sudden decrease in the strength of her body's restraint. Finally, the heavens gave her the opportunity to counterattack. Seizing the right moment, she kicked her foot and fiercely hit the man's lower body. Then, without any response from the man, she flipped over and grabbed the nail she had just seen in her palm, firmly pressing it against the long neck artery. Don't move. The voice of Bai Chaoge echoed softly. The man still wanted to struggle, constantly moving his body, causing Bai Chaoge to only add a few more points of strength to his hand. Old thing, don't you want to die anymore? Bai Chaoge's expression, which seemed to be a smile but not a smile, seeped through the darkness. This time, the director felt scared for the first time and quickly raised his hand to beg for mercy. Auntie, I was wrong. Can't I still be wrong? The director's neck was pierced by rivets, causing blood to gush out. His face had long been frightened and turned pale and bruised. He now regrets it so much that his intestines are turning pale. Whoever is not good to provoke, he must provoke this Bai Chaoge. This is not the first time he has wanted to take action against Bai Chaoge. In the past, it was because he knew that Bai Chaoge was the daughter of a mistress and had always been the least favored within the family, often not even as good as the family dog. However, recently, Bai Chaoge's disguise was too successful, which made him look down on him, and that's why he has not been able to take action. Today, I suddenly discovered the elegance under the disguise of Bai Chaoge, and it was only then that he was moved to the heart of a jackal. Blood flowed down the man's neck and into Bai Chaoge's palm, before she slowly released the force from her hand and pushed him to the ground like garbage. Get lost. If you provoke me again next time, it won't be as simple as shedding a few drops of blood. The director covered his neck in pain and looked at Bai Chaoge with a frightened expression on his face. He then crawled out of the door, as if following some monster behind him. This cheap hoof, you'll look good later. Bai Chaoge followed closely behind, holding the nail in her palm tightly. If anything unexpected happens, she doesn't mind losing a few lives. A few lives for one life, she's not at a disadvantage. Outside, there were many prison guards and melon-eating crowds gathered in small groups, waiting to see Bai Chaoge's jokes. Among the dozen or so young boys and girls who came in with them, only Bai Chaoge had always disguised himself as a messy, neutral, and male and female beggar without being subjected to the torment of the prison. Are you saying that Bai Chaoge is standing or sitting now? A despicable man covered his mouth and joked. Standing or sitting? It must be lying down. As soon as the former spoke, someone immediately answered, followed by a burst of laughter. Ha ha ha, Jia. As soon as the door of the small black room opened, everyone showed incredible expressions. Especially when they saw the director walking ahead with a disheartened expression like a daughter.in.law, while Bai Chaoge swaggered behind him, they almost startled their chins. What's going on here? The man who had just started provoking didn't expect things to turn into the current situation. How do I feel that Bai Chaoge seems to have become different? Like what? The man who agreed kept pounding his head, unable to think of how to describe the powerful aura of Bai Chaoge now. Big sister. I don't know who exclaimed in secret. Others began to react, and now Bai Chaoge's overall demeanor was like that of a gangster leader who had been wandering in the martial arts world for many years. Big sister. The director felt like a monkey in a circus now, being pointed at by someone. Anger and shame surged in his heart, and he shouted loudly, "You kids are not going to die anymore. What are you looking at?" With this roar, the prison guards also came to their senses and quickly turned around, afraid to look at the scene again, afraid of being retaliated by the angry director. Bai Chaoge showed no interest in them and dodged into a dark corner. Calculating the date, she will be discharged in less than half a month. When that happens, it's not too late to find this old man to settle the accounts. Don't worry about this for a while. In the neglected corner of the water room, Bai Chaoge carefully sprayed the ointment she had finally found on her hands and body. Her body was already numb and she couldn't feel any pain, but the corners of her eyes were slightly blurred, revealing her sadness. A lonely king beast, hiding in a corner, secretly licking its wounds. Ha! Bai Chaoge, I didn't expect you to have today. Bai Chaoge laughed at himself recklessly. The same thing, before her rebirth, her pathogen had already encountered it once. Unconsciously, the image of her most fearful reappeared in her mind. In a corner, Bai Chaoge was surrounded by a group of yellow-haired thugs, who dragged her into the alley. Several thugs rushed forward and tore at her clothes. Bai Chaoge was frightened and shouted loudly, but no one paid attention to her. In a panic, she picked up the brick under her body and used all her strength to smash it at the man pressing against her. In an instant, the man's head was shattered and he fainted to the ground. Later on, the man stayed in the ICU for a period of time and insisted on not reconciling, which led to Bai Chaoge being imprisoned in the juvenile detention center. In the future, I will protect you. As if hearing the mournful cry of the soul deep inside, Bai Chaoge couldn't help but speak up to comfort. This time, she also deeply realized that she was no longer the respected and intimidating Bai Chaoge from her past life, who was always respected and feared wherever she went. Now she is just a powerless underage high school student. Bai Chaoge. Once encountering difficulties, she may be stripped naked and gnawed to the bone. During this period, she has been going too smoothly, forgetting that her abilities have been stuck in her past life. Deeply in love, she couldn't help but shed tears of humiliation, burying her head between her knees and sobbing imperceptibly. When Hellion Yuan arrived at the juvenile detention center, he did not walk through the main entrance, but secretly had someone investigate Bai Chaoge's location. He watched Bai Chaoge leave the small black room with his own eyes, and before he could truly relax, he saw Bai Chaoge quietly hiding to the side, licking his wounds. Then, I saw the scene in front of me, young master, we should go now. Qiyue followed behind Hellion Yuan, gesturing in sign language that others couldn't understand. Hellion Yuan nodded and finally looked reluctantly in the direction of Bai Chaoge before taking a light step out. After a day, taking advantage of the sunset in the western mountains, Bai Chaoge made some adjustments, picked up the food he had stolen from the kitchen, and skillfully climbed over the wall of the juvenile detention center, rushing down the mountain without stopping. There was only one voice in my heart telling me. That little mute must be starving. Perhaps even Bai Chaoge herself didn't realize that she was still struggling and focused solely on the safety and well-being of others. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Heavenly Waste. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Heavenly Waste. Perhaps he is the first person to have a sense of dependence on her after her rebirth. Like the brothers who had always relied on themselves in their past lives. Little brother, look at what delicious food my sister has brought you back. Bai Chaoge eagerly opened the door and heard his voice before seeing anyone, which was enough to show how much she cared about him. Just as soon as I opened the door, it was already empty inside, and there was no trace of Hellion Yuan. Where is the person? Bai Chaoge felt a little disappointed. Did he see that she hadn't come back and left first? Bai Chaoge hung her head down, wasting her time rushing down the mountain. The little electric donkey had already gone offline yesterday, so she had been running down the mountain on her legs, and now her feet are still weak. Unexpectedly, he had already left, and it seemed that he had not taken what Bai Chaoge had told him to heart, or that he did not care about Bai Chaoge at all. Ah! I've wasted all my delicious food for nothing. Bai Chaoge threw the roasted chicken and pastries on the table. These are all exclusive items for that old thing. Everyone in the entire prison knows that the old man values food more than money. After all, on that mountain, money is not circulating, and what is truly useful is food. Therefore, if anyone dares to sneak up on his ideas, he will definitely not give up. Before, even if Bai Chaoge was starving to death, he would never dare to touch these things. Just as he was thinking about what to do next, a rustling sound came from outside the door, and Bai Chaoge's alarm rang loudly. Is it that the old thing found here? Originally waiting for her here. No wonder the guards were particularly lax today. She escaped easily without any obstruction, so she was waiting here. What a clever plan. Bai Chaoge felt uneasy in his heart, but fortunately, he had enough rest during the day. Now he has the strength to fight to the death, and he will be a hero again in no more than 18 years. She gently lifted one leg, took a step back, gave herself enough room to exert her strength, clenched her fists in front of her chest, adjusted her breathing state, and waited for the end. Jiya. The wooden door opens from the inside out, and the sound of footsteps gradually approaches. Here we go. Bai Chaoge silently recited in his heart. Goo 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 goo. The rabbit's voice. What's going on? While Bai Chaoge was still puzzled, the person outside had already walked in. Didn't you leave? Bai Chaoge breathed a sigh of relief and her tense body instantly relaxed. Originally, the person who came was Helian Yuan. He was holding two plump white rabbits in both hands, wrapped in a dark green military coat that Bai Chaoge had covered him before leaving. However, the difference in body size between the two was too great. The coat that was originally worn on Bai Chaoge's body had become several sizes smaller in an instant, giving him an indescribable strange feeling. Plus, Helian Yuan's hair was still stuck with blood clots, and his body was messy, probably because he was catching rabbits. He looked like he had a kind of disgust that Bai Chaoge couldn't express. Those who don't know still think it's a wild man from the deep mountains who emerged from somewhere. After all, he really doesn't have any modern temperament. You have injuries on your body, why don't you wander around? Bai Chaoge sighed helplessly and took the two rabbits from Helian Yuan's hand, gently placing them aside. With a surprisingly gentle tone, just leave these things to me. In her heart, Helian Yuan was a wounded person. Although it wasn't necessarily because of Bai Chaoge's injury, since she was saved, she took care of herself to the end, and her tone naturally softened a lot. Helian Yuan was also very obedient, sat aside, picked up the food brought back by Bai Chaoge, and started eating. Those who didn't know thought it was 10 days since they had eaten. Only Qi Wen knew that just an hour ago, the young master of their family strongly refused their cleaning proposal, and even ignored the top-notch imperial chef skills they brought over. They eagerly waited for Bai Chaoge to bring him food, and even pretended to send a bunch of subordinates to catch 2 wild rabbits for him and relieve Bai Chaoge's boredom. Anyone who sees it must curse. It's a waste. Helian Yuan was diligently cooking, and Bai Chaoge was not idle either. He carried a pile of snow into the house outside and began to light a fire and boil water. The burial of Helian Yuan has indeed reached a point where she cannot bear to watch it anymore. If she does not clean it up, she is afraid of being vomited. Come over when you're full, I'll wipe you off. Bai Chaoge observed that Helian Yuan had already eaten his fill and quickly called him over. The foul smell in the air was almost suffocating her. Helian Yuan paused, still silent. What's wrong? Shy. Bai Chaoge didn't get used to Helian Yuan's coquettishness. She stood up and pulled him over, pressed him aside, brought a towel, and was about to take it. Bai Chaoge gently took off Helian Yuan's clothes, and the scars all over her body were reflected in her eyes. In addition to the scars left by the car accident the day before, there was also a part of the scars left by an unknown time, like a centipede, covering Helian Yuan's upper body in more than 10 sizes. It seems that he has experienced many close encounters before. Bai Chaoge couldn't help but feel heartbroken. His gaze at Helian Yuan was as if he was looking at himself in his past life, who was afraid of being stabbed while sleeping. Helian Yuan's head was still a bit swollen, but fortunately he didn't hurt any bones, only a piece of his hair was scraped off, which looked quite cruel. She gritted her teeth and helped him comb his hair smoothly. Her movements were gentle, afraid of hurting him. She took out a wet towel and wiped it clean bit by bit. Last time, it was just a simple treatment, but she didn't have time to clean it up. In addition, Helian Yuan went out during the day, and the wound on his body was inevitably torn again, causing bleeding again. After removing the blood clots and stains from his body, Bai Chaoge took out a powerful potion from the medical room of the juvenile detention center and applied it to the bruises on Helian Yuan's body. He then took out iodine, cleaned the wound, and wrapped it in bandages one by one. Whether before or after her rebirth, Bai Chaoge was not less injured, and usually she handled her wounds alone, so it was a trivial matter to handle. After carefully handling the matter, Bai Chaoge delicately wrapped the last bandage around Helian Yuan and even tied a bow, looking humorous yet very cute. Appreciating his masterpiece with great pleasure, Bai Chaoge was surprised by his gentleness and patience. However, Helian Yuan has always been in a state of confusion, first being stripped naked without any warning, then dressed as a pet, with good wounds and adorned with a bow. It looks weird no matter how it looks. He just couldn't bear to interrupt the woman's movements, and his mind kept echoing the scene of Bai Chaoge hiding in a corner licking his wounds. He suspected that it was just his own dream, otherwise how could the two of them give off such a big shortcut? Alright, it's done. Bai Chaoge clapped his hands happily and finished his work. Bai Chaoge changed Helian Yuan into the clothes he had found, and after thoroughly cleaning up, Helian Yuan finally looked a bit human. Helian Yuan blinked and slowly breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, it's over. He lived for decades, being taken care of as a pet for the first time, although he was not sure why he was willing to be arbitrarily controlled. The two of them remained silent for a moment, each with their own thoughts in mind. One is being busy and tired, and the other is being unable to speak up due to one's disguise. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Silent Dao Wan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Silent Dao Wan. In the blink of an eye, stars twinkled in the starry sky. Bai Chaoge stared at the scenery outside the window, lost in thought, and had not rested well for the past few days, resulting in a very tired body. After a moment of daze, drowsiness hit, and he slowly closed his eyes and fell asleep. Looking at Bai Chaoge's sleeping face, Helian Yuan's mind flashed through many thoughts in an instant, and he clearly felt his heart and breathing involuntarily accelerating rapidly. Helian Yuan was squeezed inside the small bed by Bai Chaoge, unable to move. Unable to do anything, he could only twist his hands and feet to pull Bai Chaoge inside, afraid that she would flip over and fall to the ground. He then gently covered her with a quilt that had already been dried by someone else. After doing everything well, Helian Yuan gently lay down and faced Bai Chaoge's side. After staring for a few minutes, he gradually closed his eyes. Good night. Helian Yuan lightly lifted his thin lips and silently said late. Outside the window, in the dense forest, several men dressed in disguise were scattered and hidden. Two of them were the leaders, calmly standing on the tree trunk not far from the small wooden house to chat. Are you saying that the young master has been taken away? Red Moon held her chin and looked puzzled. It's not that he wants to maliciously speculate about Helian Yuan's actions, it's really that his behavior is too unusual. From his perspective, Bai Chaoge is just an ordinary little girl, and there is really no place worth the young master's condescension in this ghostly place. What do you dare to say? Yu patted Chiyue's head, reminding him to be cautious in his words and actions. Yu was originally only responsible for the affairs of Helian Yuan Company, as long as he used his brain. Unexpectedly, a phone call in the early morning woke him up from his dream, and then he was sent to guard this place where birds don't poop, becoming a laborer. But who let that be the order of their own young master? You're so angry. But still keep smiling. He has no choice but to vent his anger in front of the Red Moon and vent his grievances. Just his action made Chiyue also start to feel dissatisfied, and if she didn't agree, she was ready to have a fight with you. Damn it, if you have the ability, just give me a move. She was about to roll up her sleeves and come forward to tidy up Chiyue. Chiyue has always been known for being a reckless man, and once Yu teased her, she began to explode again. It's not surprising that the Red family army in the dark corner had seen this scene before. After all, these two little heads had fought not once or twice, but they were evenly matched. One was skilled in thinking and the other was skilled in using force. They would only give up when they were both defeated. Only with the presence of Helian Yuan could they settle down and obedient. On the other hand, Yu just gave a faint glance at Chiyu and said disdainfully, I will definitely accompany you to fight enough when I have some time. Now, the young master is sleeping soundly. If this small matter bothers the young master's good deeds, I think you should let Xian take over as the leader. As soon as this statement was spoken, it attracted the attention of many subordinates. Yu was truly Yu, and at critical moments, he remained as steady as ever. Along with Yu's subordinates, they also raised their heads and raised their chests, each with a small expression that was almost like using a loudspeaker to promote. See, this is my boss. A representative word for intelligence, maturity, and stability. This scene made Chiwe even more angry, but she had nowhere to vent. Suddenly, something came to her mind. Chiwe stared at Iyue and smiled coldly. By the way, have you solved that kind of thing on the mountain? On the mountain. Behind me, idle and bored, the subordinates eavesdropping on gossip are all confused. What else is there on the mountain? Chiwe is waiting to see Iyue's joke, and the task assigned by Helian Yuan to Iyue is not an easy one. The most famous juvenile detention center in Kyoto is guarded by powerful and influential young people who are either burned, killed, looted, or killed for fire prevention. The reason why the director of this juvenile detention center is not easy to deal with is precisely because the minors in the detention center are the handles of Kyoto's power, all in the hands of the director, even if he wants to walk horizontally in Kyoto. And the task assigned to him by Helian Yuan is to eliminate the current director of the juvenile detention center. For Chiwe, who is skilled in using force to solve everything, this task is simply as difficult as reaching the sky. Yu just glanced at Chiyu lightly, with a hint of disdain in his eyes. Do you think everyone is like you, a brainless warrior? For him, that matter was just a matter of using his fingers and opening his mouth. It was easily resolved, otherwise he wouldn't have been sent here to watch the night. Red Moon's eyes were filled with shock. Isn't this person's brain a bit too effective? People are really more popular than people. What they don't know is that at this moment, the mountain is much more lively than the mountain below. In the luxurious decorated office, Si Jean leisurely crossed her legs and gently twisted a page of book paper with her fingers, slowly flipping through the pages. Unexpectedly, a mere director of a small juvenile detention center earns more money in a month than I do in a year abroad. She originally thought that Iyue was calling her back to prepare to throw another mess for her, but she didn't expect it to be such a big pie left for her. Without her reaching out, someone would force it into her mouth. Is Iyue a boy with a strong conscience? Before she could be happy for 2 minutes, the assistant had already burst into the door with an urgent tone. Director, it's not good. Someone has escaped from prison again. Si Jean was taken aback and escaped from prison. Also. In an instant, she understood what was going on. Damn it, Iyue, he threw her a hot potato. In the middle of the night, Bai Chaoge sat up with drowsy eyes and turned to look. At some point, a figure appeared next to her. Bai Chaoge, who was accustomed to sleeping alone, was startled by this change and leaned outward, just as she was about to fall onto the cold ground. With a big hand on her side, Bai Chaoge felt her body suddenly have a center of gravity to rely on, and then fell into the man's arms. Unable to touch the man's sturdy chest, Bai Chaoge was first startled, but in less than a minute, he immediately bounced away. Well, I'm used to being alone now, but suddenly there's someone around me who doesn't get used to it, she said, lifting her foot and walking under the bed, meaning she'll just sleep on the ground. She just underestimated the power of Helian Yuan and held Bai Chaoge's hand. No matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't break free, so she had to admit it. I don't know if it's her illusion, but I always feel a pitiful and domineering aura on the man at this moment, like a big wolf dog begging for a hug. After smashing his tongue, Bai Chaoge had no choice but to let him go. However, he still refused to forgive others and said, "Little brother, this is what you asked for yourself. It's not my sister who wants to take advantage of you." Lying down while speaking. The man's brown pupils gradually became transparent under the moonlight, and apart from his messy hair and disheveled beard, everything else was considered perfect. Helian Yuan raised his eyebrows, forming a perfect curve at the corner of his mouth, with a gentle and emotional tone between his eyebrows and eyes. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. If something goes wrong, there must be a demon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. If something goes wrong, there must be a demon. In the early morning, Bai Chaoge rushed back to the juvenile detention center on the mountain as usual. This time, she was well prepared. Whenever that old man dared to touch her, she promised to let him reincarnate and become a new person. As usual, the light car climbed over the wall and entered the house, but before she could take any further action, the playground that was supposed to be lively for morning exercise was quiet and quiet. "What's going on?" Bai Chaoge asked the air. Just as she was puzzled, a few light footsteps could be heard from behind. Bai Chaoge thought to herself that it was not good. These people were just practitioners, and she may not be their opponent. "You are Bai Chaoge." A female voice came from behind, with a cold and magnetic voice. Just by listening to the voice, one could tell that the person coming was a mature and intellectual woman. Bai Chaoge turned cautiously and slowly, looking up and down at the person coming in. She was very certain that she had never seen her before. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" Bai Chaoge lowered her voice, releasing an aura that did not match her current age. "Hello, I'm the new director. Si Jean. I'm the fourth oldest in my family, and you can also call me Miss C." Si Jean explained kindly, noticing Bai Chaoge's high level of vigilance, and quickly added a few words. "As for me, I'm new here and I don't know much about many things, but I think you will definitely explain to me the reason why you escaped, right?" Si Jean only received a notice to take good care of the young girl in front of her, who was still wet and wet. However, no one told her who this little girl belonged to, and it was still unclear who Bai Chaoge came from. Therefore, she could only handle her affairs with a fair and rigorous attitude. No slander, no flattery, just right. Unexpectedly, Si Jin's attitude was much better than the previous director's, and Bai Chaoge didn't know where to start explaining at once. He opened his mouth and hesitated for a while. "Well, director, it's like this." Bai Chaoge's face didn't turn red and his heart didn't panic, even ignoring whether Si Jin would conduct an autumn audit afterwards. "Bullying. Sick. That's why I had to escape from the juvenile detention center." Si Jin always listened to the story of Bai Chaoge with a smile on her face, but had no trust in the words and phrases in it. She couldn't see through the little girl's thoughts in front of her, and didn't have any understanding of her. However, based solely on the aura she felt when she first met, Bai Chaoge was definitely not a girl to be slaughtered. The seamless story in her mouth was just to fool her, it was just that the little girl wanted to act, and she definitely couldn't dampen the mood. That's how things are. Bai Chaoge's eyes were filled with tears, as if she wanted to cry and pretended to be strong. Anyone who saw it would feel heartbroken. Oh my, how could there be such a pitiful little obedience? Don't worry, when my sister comes in the future, she will definitely not be hurt again. Si Jin pretended to be moved and shed tears, keeping up with Bai Chaoge's pace in time. He had to have a proper attitude towards the play. The clumsy acting skills of the two embarrassed the assistant Xiao Bei, who witnessed the entire scene to the point of picking her toes. She dared to bet that if these two continued to embarrass each other, she could have managed to carve out a 3-bedroom apartment, and she would have had all the money left for buying a house. "Well, director, we still have a meeting at 8 o'clock. Xiao Bei couldn't bear to watch anymore and quickly found an excuse to support Si Jin. After chatting for more than 10 minutes, Si Jinxian reminded Wan to take good care of Bai Chaoge's body before pretending to be reluctant and being dragged away by Xiao Beilian. Just turned the corner, the face that was originally smiling suddenly became gloomy. "Do you see it?" Si Jin whispered in a deep voice. "It's really not that simple. Assistant Xiao Bei has been with Si Jin for nearly 8 years, and she can guess the other person's implied meaning at a glance without saying anything. It's not easy, that's right. Otherwise, how could she be reminded to take special care of her?" Si Jin casually tidied up her collar, everything was within her expectations. Besides the surprise that Bai Chaoge brought her. She didn't know, at the same time as she was speculating about the details of Bai Chaoge, he was also pondering, what was the origin of this 4 brocades? Is it the masterpiece of the 2 good sisters at home again? Take great care of her from the beginning, if anything goes wrong, there will always be demons. The easier it seems to get along with, the harder it becomes to deal with. No matter who you are, no matter what purpose you approach me with, just let your horse come over. Bai Chaoge's eyes contracted, and his whole body was stirred up with a sense of war. Bai Chaoge, come out for a moment, someone is looking for you. After Bai Chaoge returned from the playground, he hid in bed and was in a daze. The prison guard suddenly walked over and knocked on the iron door outside with an iron rod, shouting. At the foot of the mountain, Bai Chaoge had just left the small wooden house at the front, but Hellion Yuan at the back woke up. The bed beside him still had some warmth, but its owner had long disappeared. "Young master, we should go back now," said Yu respectfully. "I don't know when my face was painted, my eyes were bruised, and the corners of my lips were slightly swollen. However, early in the morning, Red Moon escorted Bai Chaoge back to the mountain, but he hasn't returned yet." Hellion Yuan lazily sat up, raised his arm, and Yu stepped forward to help Hellion Yuan get up and out of bed. Immediately after, several black bodyguards entered the door to dress up Hellion Yuan. Hellion Yuan stood by the bed, his slender fingers impatiently tidying up the cuffs. He glanced at Yu without leaving a trace and said coldly, "Next time there's such a private fight during the mission, pack your bags and leave immediately." Yu was startled and immediately knelt down on the ground, his straight waist hitting the ground vertically. "I understand my mistake, I will immediately receive punishment when I go back." The arrogant and domineering man raised his eyes awkwardly, dressed in a handmade black Chinese suit that outlined his slender figure. The collar of the shirt, lined with a blue-gray color, was slightly open, revealing the man's tempting collarbone. The healthy wheat skin color further highlighted the man's aggressive and handsome appearance. His fingertips gently caressed the bandage placed on the table, and the bow on top remained in its original shape. He could even feel the ambiguity of Bai Chaoge tying the bandage for him on it. "When Qiyue comes back, let's go abroad and exercise together," Hellion Yuan said casually. During this period, the two people who made the most mistakes were none other than him. He was not lacking in experts around him. If it weren't for the fact that they had accompanied him through life and death many times, he would never have kept them by his side. "Young master, the situation in China has been bad lately. Please allow us to protect you for a while longer." Yu boldly said his innermost thoughts, burying his head even lower. This time, Hellion Yuan's injury was not just an accident. He already had some clues. If he suddenly withdrew from Hellion Yuan's side, he was afraid it would cause incalculable damage. "I have already found out about this matter, so I don't need you at the moment." During the time he was recovering from his injuries in the cabin, he had already thoroughly investigated the matter. As for why he sent them abroad at this level, he naturally had his own plans. Yu looked up at Hellion Yuan, pondered for a moment, as if thinking of something, and his eyes lit up instantly. "Yes, young master." End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Chi Field 2.8 meters. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Chi Field 2.8 meters, Bai Chaoge, as the head of the family said, "As long as you are willing to admit your mistake, there will still be a place for you in the family," said Bai Sanfu, the butler of the Bai family with disdain. The disgust in his eyes was about to come out, and his gaze at Bai Chaoge seemed to be looking at some trash. But Bai Chaoge's expression had always been cold. As soon as he stepped into the reception hall, he heard such imperative words. No one would be happy, even the old man who was the former director didn't look at people with his nose high and mighty. Moreover, Bai Sanfu was just an old butler in the Bai family. In the memory of Bai Chaoge, the image of Bai Sanfu has never been very good. Watching people order food is one attitude towards Bai Nianzi, and another attitude towards her. Before Bai Chaoge entered the juvenile detention center, Bai Sanfu had never had a good face towards her, the second miss of the Bai family. Not only was he very harsh with her in his words, he constantly praised his half-sister Bai Nianzi, but he also mercilessly belittled Bai Chaoge's identity. He indulged Bai family servants in hitting and cursing Bai Chaoge on a daily basis, treating her like an enemy. Even if she is the second young lady of the Bai family, who is not legitimate and speaks ill of, she wouldn't have received such treatment, would she? What about the so-called Bai family? In Bai Chaoge's memory, there is no good impression of it at all. Her father doesn't hurt, and her mother is gone. No one cares about her all year round. Even the people in charge of the Bai family can often make things difficult for her at will. In my memory, there was a time when she really almost died. She was 10 years old, much colder than this winter, with no clothes to wear. In the end, she couldn't bear it anymore and could only hide in the doghouse to keep warm. If it weren't for the old aunties of the Bai family discovering her trembling in the doghouse and looking at her pitifully, bringing her clothes, she probably would have really confessed it there. Bai Chaoge ignored Bai Sanfu and walked straight to a stool to sit down, not even bothering to give a glance throughout the journey. Bai Sanfu was stimulated by Bai Chaoge's attitude, and suddenly became angry from the bottom of his heart. His gaze towards Bai Chaoge became even more disgusted. "What's so arrogant about you, the daughter of a slut?" As he spoke, he was about to rush forward and give Bai Chaoge a slap. Unexpectedly, the prison guard beside him was not a vegetarian either. He casually swung his baton and hit Bai Sanfu's forehead, causing him to scream in pain. You, what are you doing?" The wrinkles on Bai Sanfu's face suddenly squeezed together, painfully covering his head and accusing the prison guard. The prison guard didn't eat his tricks and immediately retorted, "This is the juvenile detention center. Do you think it's your home? If you want to hit someone, just hit them." The prison guard looked down at Bai Sanfu from a high position, took out his phone and sent a message to someone, but then turned his gaze to Bai Sanfu's every move. You look great." Bai Sanfu was forced by the prison guards to speak incoherently, both hesitant and angry. "If you call your director over to me, I won't believe that your director can't control you anymore." When it comes to the director, Bai Sanfu has become more confident. How can he be confident that the director will definitely help him speak? "And you, Bai Chaoge, I'll give you another chance for the last time. As long as you obediently follow what I say, otherwise, you won't want to go out here in your lifetime." Bai Sanfu finished scolding the prison guard and turned his spear at Bai Chaoge. Bai Chaoge's eyes suddenly became cold and sharp. Is his strength related to him? He is really kind to Bai Nianci, even willing to take on such a relationship with someone just to get rid of her, an underage girl. Those who don't know even think that Bai Nianci is his own, so they rush to help her. Bai Chaoge curved his lips and chuckled, "I won't go out for a lifetime. Coincidentally, I don't have any attachment or emotion towards that so-called home. Staying here is actually easier. Never go out for a lifetime." How could it be? The Bai family can be considered as a powerful figure in the capital circle. How could they possibly allow a daughter who has been locked up in a juvenile detention center? Don't they want face anymore? Bai Chaoge wouldn't be fooled by him. Previously, Bai Chaoge had been oppressed and bullied by him too much. It's not an exaggeration for her to recover some interest appropriately now. Bai Sanfu frowned as he saw that Bai Chaoge had not been deceived. Has this little slut become smarter? Before, I would have cried and begged him to let go and let him do whatever he wanted, just like a cow or a horse. The situation before him was truly beyond his expectations. Or was it that something unexpected happened in the juvenile detention center, allowing Bai Chaoge to come into contact with powerful characters, which led to a significant change in her personality? Just as Bai Sanfu was pondering, footsteps came from outside the door, and he immediately stood up excitedly. Now, all he had was one idea. To investigate what Bai Chaoge had experienced here, and to accelerate his steps to make Bai Chaoge disappear from this world. I don't know who's looking for me. Si Jin strode into the reception hall and stood at the entrance, patrolling a few people inside, speaking solemnly. Several question marks immediately popped up in Bai Chaoge's mind. Is this new director the same person as what he saw before? The aura is completely different, it can be said to be completely opposite. The person who chatted with her before was a gentle and intellectual temperament. Why haven't we seen each other for just a few hours? She feels that Si-jin's aura is now almost 2.8 meters. Si-jin saw Bai Chaoge's bewildered gaze and immediately cast a gentle eyebrow and eye at her, indicating that she didn't have to worry, everything had her. Are you the director? Bai Sanfu rubbed his eyes incredulously, thinking he was dizzy. The person he had previously been connected with was a middle-aged man with a big belly and fat intestines. How could he suddenly become a woman, and she was also a pretty-looking woman? Yes, that's right. Si-jin's expression on her face was constantly changing. 1 second she was still teasing Bai Chaoge, and the next second her gaze at Bai Sanfu became icy and piercing. Bai Sanfu's little plan was already clear to Si-jin, so when he saw Bai Sanfu himself, his face naturally had a lifeless expression. It would be better not to directly send someone to throw him out of the wilderness and feed the wolves. Are you all right? It wasn't you a few days ago. Bai Sanfu still couldn't believe it. That person had given him a personality guarantee, and there would definitely be no accidents. Are you talking about the former director? Si-jin hugged her chest with both hands and looked at Bai Sanfu with even more disgust. The former director resigned from the position of director of the Juvenile Detention Center last night due to personal reasons. As soon as these words were spoken, Bai Sanfu felt his spiritual world being struck by a thunderbolt, trembling and afraid to speak. Suddenly thinking of the old lady's instructions, Bai Sanfu gritted his teeth and turned to threaten Bai Chaoge. Bai Chaoge, it will be the old lady's birthday in a while. As long as you kneel down and beg for mercy from me now, I will naturally say a few good words for you in front of the old lady and the head of the family when I go back. Bai Chaoge didn't pay any attention to him, just playing with his fingers on his own. Red Fruit ignored him, which resulted in even more inexplicable resentment from Bai Sanfu. A gloomy expression appeared on his face, and he stamped his foot before flying away. Bai Chaoge, this is what you brought for yourself. The old lady and the head of the family were kind, which is why Bai Chaoge has been kept until now. In addition, the Bai family does not have a male grandson, which is why the old lady has repeatedly regressed and tolerated Bai Chaoge. Even disregarding the family's dignity, she has to bring up her illegitimate daughter who lost her mother. They just thought that if Bai Chaoge could be raised properly and become a pawn in a marriage alliance when he reached adulthood, it would also be a good thing for the Bai family. They didn't expect that since Bai Chaoge started recording things, he has been persistent, frequently making mistakes, and often doing bad things that harm his family. Now, he has been locked up in the Juvenile Detention Center. After Bai Sanfu left the gate of the Juvenile Detention Center, he immediately dialed the phone of the head of the household, Bai Jianqin, and said, Master, Chaoge, this child is still as stubborn as ever. Now he can't even listen to me. So what should we do next? Okay, I understand. Hanging up the phone, Bai Sanfu turned around and stared at the sign of the Juvenile Detention Center, pondering for several seconds. A seamless plan came out in his heart. Since you don't want to listen to me anymore, you need to see if you still have the life to withstand the test. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Shame on you. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Shame on you, Chaoge, that person was not a good person just now. After Bai Sanfu left, Si-jin coldly said something. She did not explain Sanfu's previous plan to Bai Chaoge, and I believe that with Bai Chaoge's intelligence, she could definitely hear another layer of meaning in her words. Bai Chaoge didn't say anything. She didn't understand Si-jin's meaning, but she couldn't understand why Bai Sanfu had such a great hatred towards him, forcing her into a desperate situation. Chaoge, are you listening? Si-jin saw that Bai Chaoge remained silent, so she had to interrupt her thoughts. Bai Chaoge looked up at Si-jin and for an instant regained his usual calm expression, I'm hungry. She can no longer remember how long it has been since she had a good meal. Originally standing at 1.68 meters tall, she weighed less than 90 pounds, and it can be said that she is as thin as a stick. Si Jin touched the tip of her nose, not expecting Bai Chaoge to react this way. Her smile softened a bit, and she pulled Bai Chaoge up and walked towards the cafeteria. After wandering around all day, as soon as it was dark, Bai Chaoge couldn't wait to climb over the wall and rush to the small wooden house at the foot of the mountain. Boss, is it really good to openly let her out like this? Xiao Bei held his glasses, which were about to fall off, puzzled by Si Jin's behavior. Si Jin is now the director of the Juvenile Detention Center, and her responsibility is to protect the safety of the children and guide them back to the right path. But isn't Si Jin's behavior now just shielding Bai Chaoge? If discovered by superiors or other children aware of Si Jin's favoritism, it may not necessarily cause much trouble. As an assistant, she must always remind Si Jin not to make mistakes. She's smarter than you, and there won't be any accidents, said Si Jin calmly. Even if it's found out from above, it won't be a problem. If there's anything, just push over the former director. Upon hearing this, Xiao Bei couldn't help but sweat profusely from his forehead. Is this still the strict boss Si Jin? Can't she also have her soul changed? Hey! Why do I have to say it? Xiao Bei, dazed and staring, scratched his brain while muttering and following behind Si Jin. On this side, Bai Chaoge, as usual, rushed to the small wooden house at the foot of the mountain with a pile of food. The room was as clean, tidy, and meticulous as ever, but the people living inside were nowhere to be seen. Time passed by minute by second while waiting. As the sun rose in the east, a cluster of sunrise shot into the room from the window, illuminating the scenery inside. Bai Chaoge's last bit of patience was exhausted. It seems like she really left this time. Bai Chaoge lay dejectedly on the bed, with the scent of medicine still lingering on the man's body. She took a deep breath of nostalgia, and finally let out a long sigh. Sure enough, men can't believe it. Bai Chaoge casually tidied up the inside of the house, then went outside to search for many dead branches and rotten leaves scattered on the small wooden house. After making a cover-up, he hurriedly withdrew. Before bidding farewell, he turned back and bowed to the small wooden house with reluctance. Goodbye. My dear cabin is my first resting place after rebirth. As Bai Chaoge's figure gradually faded away, behind the tree, a long-hidden black bodyguard appeared together. Young master, Miss Bai has left, said Chiwe with a humble expression. They have been outside all night, thinking that Bai Chaoge would give up after waiting for a while, but unfortunately they overestimated Bai Chaoge's persistence. Helian Yuan nodded blankly, his face pale and unnaturally pale. Just as he was about to speak and order the large army to return, his eyes suddenly turned black and he collapsed to the ground. For the next week, Bai Chaoge remained quiet and didn't want to speak. He never left the juvenile detention center again, but stayed obediently in his room every day, either reading or daydreaming. These days, no one has bothered her again at the juvenile detention center, and under the management of Si Jin, there have been no more incidents of fighting or trouble with Bai Chaoge, and she is also happy to be idle. I just occasionally think of that little mute. I don't know if he was eaten by a wild wolf or if he went home on his own. Ah! Bai Chaoge went to the bathroom and accidentally caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. His face could still be seen slightly, but his figure was a bit unbearable. Bai Chaoge let out a long sigh and was reborn into such a body, feeling very helpless. He particularly missed his beautiful figure in his past life. Chaoge, what are you doing? Si Jin appeared behind Bai Chaoge at some point, curiously looking at her as she looked in the mirror and muttered to herself. Bai Chaoge let out a sigh and pretended to walk out of the bathroom as if nothing had happened. He was already accustomed to the behavior of Si Jin looking for her every now and then. You're really comfortable as a director, Bai Chaoge joked as he walked up to Si Jin. Whether in her past or present life, she had never seen anyone like Si Jin. She was an impressive director who didn't work hard every day. She only came to play with her as a high school student. If it weren't for this being a juvenile detention center, others might have thought that Bai Chaoge had come in through the back door. What nonsense are you talking about? Si Jin tapped Bai Chaoge's head and sat lazily on his bed. I'm afraid you're bored, so I came to find you just after finishing my business. Si Jin didn't know what happened to Bai Chaoge when she went out a few days ago. All she knew was that since that day, she had never heard of Bai Chaoge going out again, and she had been locked in her room all day, not talking or playing with anyone. According to previous information, Bai Chaoge is the least favored second son in the family, and he is not the kind born to the legitimate wife. He is an illegitimate child despised by individuals. She also has some understanding of the trivial matters in the wealthy courtyard, such as Bai Chaoge, who is most prone to mental illness. As a professional, it's not normal to care about the physical and mental health of your child. Just her concern was not a good thing in Bai Chaoge's heart. For example, now, Bai Chaoge only wants to lie down peacefully, but her bed is being occupied by a skinny and shameless older sister. Beautiful woman, this is my bed. Bai Chaoge smiled and looked at Si Jin with extremely unfriendly eyes. During this time, Si Jin has become familiar with Bai Chaoge. She has long been immune to Bai Chaoge's move, but simply replied with the same smile as Bai Chaoge and patted the position next to her, saying, "Come on, sister, give you half." How shameless. Bai Chaoge's face turned black for most of it. This is clearly my bed, how did it become something you allocated to me? Can't you get up? Bai Chaoge rolled up her sleeves and pretended to be ready to grab the territory. Si Jin was a bit funny. I used to see Bai Chaoge's old and mature demeanor, but suddenly saw her change her posture and felt very fresh, making me feel very playful. Sorry, if you have the ability, you can come up and grab it. Her tone was mixed with obvious teasing. Obviously, she prefers the childish Bai Chaoge, which makes her look really like a 17 or 18-year-old child. With these words, Bai Chaoge strode forward and wrestled with Si Jin. In a short time, they became a fried dough twists, which looked very funny. Are you letting go? Bai Chaoge grabbed Si Jin's big wave and threatened. Si Jin was also unwilling to be outdone and increased his grip on Bai Chaoge's earrings, saying, "If you let me go, I'll let go." The two of them come and go, and we don't give in to each other. Until a sound of footsteps came from outside the door. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Do not look at you without etiquette. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Do not look at you without etiquette, boss, someone is visiting. As soon as Xiaobei entered the door, he saw the scene of Bai Chaoge and Si Jin hurriedly tidying up their clothes. She suddenly realized, her cheeks flushed, her palms covering her eyes, and her mouth began to mutter, "I haven't seen anything. Don't look at anything unless it's polite, don't listen to it, don't look at it unless it's polite, don't look at it unless it's polite." Xiaobei's reaction was unexpected for both of them. He opened his mouth, but still didn't know where to explain it. In the end, he couldn't help but laugh and both of them burst into laughter, ha ha ha. With a smile on her face, Bai Chaoge's eyes gradually turned red. Her gaze at Si Jin could no longer be tense, and tears gushed out. The martial arts aura on Si Jin's body is so nostalgic. It has been a long time since Bai Chaoge experienced such a scene of unrestrained and lively atmosphere. What's wrong with you? Si Jin noticed Bai Chaoge's abnormality and quickly approached to care. How could this child change so easily, even laughing so happily in the last second? Si Jin's concern made Bai Chaoge even more tense, and she choked up and said, "I miss my mother." That's weird. Bai Chaoge just doesn't want to reveal his identity as a reborn person, but it's hard to explain his behavior of crying uncontrollably. We can only use her dead and unseen mother in this life to block it. Unexpectedly, as soon as Bai Chaoge spoke these words, Si Jin couldn't jump out and cried loudly, "I miss my mom too much." She thought of her own background, which was extremely similar to Bai Chaoge. She was also born without a mother and was despised by others, claiming to have suppressed her mother. Even now, this needle has deeply penetrated her heart and cannot be pulled out. Well, although I don't want to disturb you, boss, why don't you hold back for a while? Xiao Bei covered her ears, closed her eyes tightly, and couldn't help but come in shouting loudly. The two of them were startled, as if they were being held down on their acupoints. They froze and stared at Xiao Bei, who was behaving strangely outside. Bai Chaoge and Si Jin exchanged a glance and said, "What's wrong with her?" Si Jin was the first to react, blinking her eyes and saying, "Did she just say someone came to visit me?" Bai Chaoge looked bewildered and waved his hand. "I don't know, don't ask me anything." She had just become emotionally agitated and didn't hear anything, only shedding tears of sadness. So Si Jin asked her for nothing. Si Jin felt helpless, but looking at Bai Chaoge's expression, she felt very cute. She couldn't help but touch her face and pick up Bai Chaoge's chin, saying, "Be good, wait for me here. I'll come back when I go out." If it's not etiquette, don't look, if it's not etiquette, don't listen." Xiao Bei muttered as if he had seen something dirty before shyly running out. She seems to have misunderstood something. Xiao Bei's reaction, coupled with Si Jin and her movements, suddenly cleared Bai Chaoge's mind. "I just said what these ghosts have been calling, so I misunderstood them." At this moment, Si Jin still didn't understand what was wrong with them. He maintained this teasing action of Bai Chaoge, so embarrassed that Bai Chaoge pushed Si Jin away and kept a certain distance. Bai Chaoge is certain that he is straight, but unfortunately, Si Jin is curved. Thinking carefully about this period of time, Si Jin has been deliberately taking care of herself. Is it really? Bai Chaoge shook her head and threw away this evil idea. It's better to keep a distance at all times in the future. What's wrong with you? Bai Chaoge's series of strange actions left Si Jin puzzled and could only ask. A child who has finally been amused cannot be depressed again by Xiao Bei, who is careless. It's okay, you hurry up and deal with your own affairs." Bai Chaoge just wanted to quickly open the 4 brocades, afraid that she would devour her alive. Okay, then I'll go," she said, giving Bai Chaoge a bear hug while she wasn't paying attention, and quickly ran away. Reception hall. Bai Jianqin walked back and forth in the hall for nearly half an hour, but he didn't see any trace of Bai Chaoge. He sent people to urge him 7 or 8 times, but each time he was evaded with various reasons. Where exactly is Bai Chaoge? Has he come yet? Bai Jianqin couldn't help but personally urge him, obviously feeling a bit impatient. If it weren't for Wang Fengji, the elderly mother of the family, who reminded and urged her to bring several children together to her banquet, he would never have licked his face in such a ghostly place, let alone let go of the face of the head of the family and run to bring Bai Chaoge back. Chaoge is studying at the local cultural center. What are you looking for her for? The person did not see her, and the voice arrived first, talking about Si Jin. When she arrived, she understood the ins and outs of the situation, and if she wanted to take someone away from the juvenile detention center, she was afraid she would have to pass her hurdle first. Others can be completely ignored by Si Jin, but Bai Chaoge cannot. There was an order from her superiors to protect her, but in the process of getting along later, Si Jin found that she truly liked her. Even without the arrangement from her superiors, she would still favor Bai Chaoge based on her personal personality. However, in the eyes of Bai Jianqin, Si Jin's behavior had turned into Bai Chaoge's personal behavior. He was already dissatisfied with Bai Chaoge's illegitimate daughter, so he was directly sentenced to death. This unfilial daughter, is her father more important than the things in the family? Bai Jianqin was furious and directly labeled Bai Chaoge as an unfilial child in his heart. This statement is particularly harsh in Si Jin's ears, and focusing on studying becomes unfilial. What kind of reason is this? It seems that Bai Chaoge's refusal to go back is the right choice. Dad doesn't hurt, Mom is not here, and when we go back, we are still at the mercy of others. Master Bai's words are not accurate. Of course, learning is more important than father. Si Jin originally wanted to say something even more unpleasant and retorted. After thinking about it, Bai Chaoge would still go back sooner or later. That was always her home, and Bai Jianqin was ultimately her biological father. If he angered Bai Jianqin and returned to the Bai family later, this treatment would probably become even worse. What does director mean by this? Bai Jianqin's face darkened, and his words carried a slight pressure. Whether it is the head of a company or the chairman of several listed groups, this aura is not comparable to that of ordinary people. Xiao Bei was frightened by Bai Jianqin's aura and took 2 steps back, afraid to look directly into his eyes. Si Jin took a step forward, blocking Xiao Bei's gaze and resisting the pressure. A silent competition began from then on. What does Master Bai think it means? That's what it means. Si Jin remained stable like a mountain and directly met Bai Jianqin's gaze. Bai Jianqin didn't expect that even a mere director of a juvenile detention center dared to shout at him, and his eyes flashed with a hint of abnormality before returning to normal. Before coming, he only briefly inquired about the origin of the new director. A 32-year-old woman, who had replaced her predecessor as the director for more than 10 years in just one night, thought that she was another inconspicuous little character who betrayed her body and climbed to the top. I saw it today, but the rumors are not true. The aura emanating from Si Jin was even greater than his own, and he almost lost the battle. Despite his calm demeanor, he was already feeling a bit uneasy. He had to pretend to be calm for the sake of his own face. End of this chapter.